right, so we're moving on to our next session now, which is designing for multiple input types across devices. And so I'm going to hand it over to Alina Kadlubsky from the Open AR Cloud, Director of Communications there. And so, yeah, I'll let you go ahead and introduce the panel and then take it from there.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Ken. Welcome, everybody. Hope you guys are enjoying the design summit so far. Yeah, welcome to our XR Design Summit, Designing for Multiple Input Types. My name is Alina Kadlubsky. I'm a creative and WebXR developer by day and Director of Communication and Managing Director of Open AR Cloud Europe. I'm super excited to share today's stage with all these amazing, inspiring people. So without further ado, let's dive right in. And yeah, why don't you introduce yourself, Michael, and to the crowd and everybody else?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
All right. Sound loud and clear? All right, great. My name is Michael Posso. I'm a designer by education and immersive technologies by profession. I currently work as a web developer, and I've been working with Unity and WebXR for the past more like 3 years. I have a small organization whose purpose is to bring all new technologies to the communities in New York City. Being a multilingual, multicultural city like New York, a lot of the courses that I create are bilingual. So the idea is, to bring this to those newcomers, to those communities here in New York City that probably don't have the resources or the means to learn about how technology can change their lives and improve their lives.
Yeah, and next, Adrian, why don't you give a short introduction of yourself to our audience?
Yeah. I don't know whether you'd call me a developer or an artist, but I'm kind of a bit of both. I've been programming ever since I got my Sega Genesis when I was 6 years old. And that just basically, through the magic of video games, kind of got me into the technology field. So I've worked at Microsoft and some startups in San Francisco as well, where I kind of got bitten by the startup culture there. And also where I got really into VR. So then I also did a stint at Magic Leap and some other VR startups. And then just, I guess, through just the weight of experience, enough people took a chance on my crazy idea, basically to visualize the Webiverse as a video game. And then we ended up raising money. And here I kind of am running Webiverse.
Awesome.
Yeah, and essentially Webiverse is our manifestation of what we think the metaverse should look like in terms of creator accessibility, where things are just very drag and drop. Things are very lively, they're fun, and it works across all input devices. We actually have WebXR support here, where we basically rig up the skeleton. But as you can see, it's also completely supported in 2D, where we have a full animation system, and we're working with a bunch of artists to basically bring this to life. There's some crypto aspects as well, but I'm going to try to steer clear of controversy here.
Awesome. Yinj, why don't you give a short intro of yourself?
My name is Yin Sheep, and I'm the founder of Playco. We are a software solutions company interested in helping people solve the problems. I've been a VR developer since the HTC Vive first came out, and did a lot of stuff working in Unity, making PC VR, tested PC VR for education and for training. And recently, I came across when the Quest 2 came out, I became much more interested in the use of WebVR for WebXR to deploy VR experiences, and we use WebXR to do education and training as we did before, but now based on the web platform. And we are an enormous fan of the Wonderland engine.
Awesome. And last but not least, Sam.
Hi. Thanks for having me. I'm the founder, CEO, and CTO of Loci, and we're a web-based game engine for reducing risk in large-scale organizations. So we use digital twins to create simulation fly-throughs and simulated content for people that would normally not get it, like people like you and me going to a concert. We can see a fly-through to our exit and tap where it is on a map and actually have a better chance of exiting that building alive should emergency arise. But before that, I was working for years in WebXR. I had a WebXR development lab with Jin from Webiverse, who's now at Webiverse, and we worked with Janice, the Janice VR framework, for a couple of years, doing all sorts of business use cases, everything from building virtual film schools to large-scale crowd simulation, which is really what took me into the safety space. And I had to take a step back from the 3D side for a couple of years to really focus on the web side, because the web is changing so much, and figuring out how to get standards working and something that's actually stable and can be delivered to large-scale organizations that isn't going to be just a gimmick or a marketing thing, but something reliable and stable, getting real with what it meant to deliver in multiple languages, and actually really figuring out how to get the most out of what the web promises before I start adding to it. And that's really where I landed now, which is building a game engine that's deploying to all these different device types, from like a tiny phone to a TV and into a headset, which is why I'm excited to have this conversation today, because when you're talking about the web, you have to figure out what lens you're looking through it and who you want it to go to if you want to be successful.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So yeah, before we continue our conversation and dive a bit more into the conversation itself, we actually would like to further set the scene a bit. Here. So I hope you guys can see my screen. So basically, currently, can you guys see my screen?
I don't think so.
I think I'd ask Ben to switch your screen on. There we are.
Okay, so yeah, basically, we are currently at the dawn of a new era of technology where the senses meet technology, and precisely emerging technology gives us the opportunity to create precisely unthinkable experiences. And AR and VR devices are not only involving graphics and senses, they are multi-sensory experiences with different output devices. And basically, from hand tracking to controllers to senses stimulation devices, brain-computer interfaces. But for designers, it might be a bit tricky, as they are not just only merging from 2D, but also 3D, and basically understanding 3D space.
Alina,
so
could you foreground your slide?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Can you guys now see my slide?
Yes.
Oh,
yeah, we
awesome.
can see it. You might want to hit on the presentation so we can see it full screen. I'm sure that our viewers will also appreciate that. There you go. Perfect.
Awesome. So yeah, basically, we as humans, we are interacting with the world around us with all our senses. And basically, at one point, this is also how we want to experience any immersive experience, either in web-based or out of web-based. And we're dealing with different input and output devices. So it's not just only controllers, but also haptic devices, hand gesture movements, voice interaction, and smell, taste, and especially also audio and spatial audio experiences. So for designers moving from 2D and into 3D space, it could be a bit challenging. So Michael, could you share some of your experiences as a teacher? What is essential for UI and UX and designers that are currently at the cusp, having ideas that they want to jump into WebXR and actually don't know where to start?
Yeah, sure. Of course, I can share some of my experience that I had teaching high school students create virtual environments using A-Frame. I found that it came very natural to them. For that specific age group, it seems that because they have been exposed to other 3D environments, like think of Roblox, think of all the other games and environments that they have access to. It has actually worked out really, really well for that particular age group. They really get the 3D environment and how to create experiences in those 3D environments. My experience with perhaps adults and undergrad has been a little bit different, especially with design students that have been taught to think on 2D. They usually start with a print-based education when they design book covers, when they design posters. Then they move to web. Even though it's a digital medium, web is still pretty much 2D, right? It just gives us some level of interaction, but in very general terms, the web is still very 2D. And they have been trained to think in the terms of that 2D environment. So usually when I start a new class, what I tell people is just take it from the basics, pen and paper. Start sketching your ideas. Don't think on that XY space. Think of XYZ. So what I tell them to start doing is to start sketching in that 3D XYZ basically template. So I usually print out a sheet of paper that has those three axes, and then I ask them to start sketching first the environment, and then on top of the environment, the application. The environment being whatever world that they're trying to create. When it comes to AR, I usually start by asking them to sketch out the space, whether that's the living room, whether that's a restaurant, whether it's a street, the user context of that particular AR application. I found that when it comes to user experience, the same principles pretty much apply to XR experiences. Things like desirability, accessibility, value, findability, all of those things pretty much apply. It's just that it requires that extra sense to really really make it to make it materialize in the space. And it's one of those things that just only comes with practice. So usually I start with sketching. We don't even open the computers. That's how I was trained as a graphic designer back then. We didn't much have computers. We had computer labs, but most of the students didn't have laptops, and we relied on pen and paper through our design process. It wasn't until the very end that we could actually have access to a design, to a computer lab, and start bringing those designs into software like Illustrator or InDesign. I feel that there are some pretty good tools these days that students can start utilizing just to get the concept going. Figma, for example, is a very popular tool right now. Is a cloud-based design tool. Has some plugins for 3D. There's other applications that would allow the students to start creating in 3D. But that is without even wearing the headset. So we're not even touching the headset until perhaps the very end of the design process. One of the issues that I run into is that as mobile VR is kind of on his way out, and we relying more and more on high-end devices, that has created a cost problem for my classrooms. So at this point, we're not relying too much on Google Cardboard devices to test or experiences. We are thinking now into moving into the high-end devices like the Oculus Quest. So yeah, I that's just one being a big barrier in educating people, is being the cost of entry to actually use the technology. We still more or less can use mobile phones and a cardboard device, but that comes with a lot of limitations as well. So I imagine that very soon schools will have XR labs, just the same way that we have computer labs, right? It's just places where students can go and have access to the devices and to a safe space where they can experiment their VR and AR applications. But I see that a lot of schools are applying that more into the curriculum. So yeah, my advice would be just start with pen and paper. Don't even bother too much about the technology. Just start creating your concepts on pen and paper, and pick a technology. I particularly use A-Frame. A-Frame has been incredibly useful for the things that we do in the classroom. Very easy to use. The majority of my students have experience with HTML, so A-Frame comes very easy to them. Once we start doing a little bit more JavaScript and components and interactions and the WebXR API, I usually leave that until the very, very end.
Awesome. Great. Adrian, what do you think, how important is storytelling and rather story living, and what is it an essential tool?
I would definitely say yes. So my career has kind of been punctuated by kind of trying to tell people the story of the metaverse and how we can actually build it together and just have this really cool virtual world where things are interoperable, and a lot of the technology problems, especially in XR, kind of get solved because people are cooperating in terms of publishing standards, using them. And yeah, kind of like ensuring that things work together and we can build the kind of stuff that we've kind of been dreaming about building for a really long time, like the things that Neil Stephenson has been writing about, right? Like the things that inspire us, like the actual metaverse. So I think storytelling is probably the #1 thing that's actually preventing us from getting like this kind of more connected virtual world that we all kind of seem to want. And by storytelling, I don't just mean literal storytelling, like we should tell some stories, although I do mean that as well. But I also mean like, why would people be incentivized to work together?
Adrian, could you go into full screen so we can have a better look at what you're doing there? Awesome. Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much.
This is just Webiverse. It's essentially one interpretation of the metaverse. Every piece of content here is essentially pulled from distributed storage just throughout various networks. A lot of it is hosted on GitHub pages, but you can basically bring in anything here. You can kind of just drag and drop things, and you can quickly add functionality because we've specified basically, or we're proposing a set of metadata that you can add to, for example, a GLB file, like this Fox, which is just a GLB file that we had one of our artists make. It's really beautiful, by the way. Essentially, you can add metadata to that GLB, which kind of looks like, let's go to fox.metaverse file. Sorry if this is a bit technical, but essentially it's some metadata. It's stuff that you're saying about the file, that there's a GLB file called fox.glb, and you want it to look at you from the root bone, which is specified by that bone name, which gives you basically instant functionality in the metaverse for a fox that can look at people. And there's also another behavior that you can add, which is pet, and you can specify the walk animation. And then with a single button press, you basically get a walking pet. And all of this is going to be multiplayer in about a week once I debug all of it and this button starts working. So you'll be able to kind of hop into a virtual world and experience basically a model that was created by a student instantly, like behaving and reacting to you in the virtual world. And we're just getting started with this. And essentially what we want to do, and
so
what
maybe
we want to do,
some of our audience, maybe we could pop in a library that we wanted to share anyways. Yeah. And people could then dive a bit more in deep of what you were just saying. So
yeah, exactly. We'll have some links shared.
Yeah, Ian, you have worked with a wide variety of input devices over the years, and could you share some of the thoughts and what bothers you most, as we can all relate that typing in XR and WebXR sucks?
Hi, everybody. I think WebXR is a new technology, and new technology needs to be to take incremental steps when engaging the mass market. I know we are coming out of a phase of early adopters, and with all new technologies, first we want to do things better using new technologies, and then we do better things. So the first step of new technology in terms of engagement is evolutionary, and then it becomes revolutionary. I think as early adopters, sometimes you're quite impatient for the next step to happen. But as we try to reach into a wider audience, then we have to sometimes slow down the rate of the rate of progress and understand that people sometimes have trouble engaging with new technology. So WebXR is young, and so broad device support is still important. So designing for multiple input devices is a practical design choice that we should still acknowledge now. And just overall, I found that it was useful to design to give the user the best experience for their device. If you have different device users, try to give them the best device experience, even if it might not be the same experience for all the devices. I know that places like FrameVR, IO do a very good job of giving a very similar experience to all devices. But in other places like VR Chat, they acknowledge that the 2D users experience the space more as a spectator, and the VR users experience it more as a performer. And so acknowledging that you have different types of users and designing for those is very important in terms of making it sort of engaging for each of the audiences. And intentional acknowledgement of the profile users will, how their user experience is really, really important. Just picking an example that isn't from WebXR is how the Nintendo Wii used the motion controllers, and that was a very effective way of engaging a new audience. So as we design, we also have to capitalize on the new technologies. And although initially we designed for everyone, eventually we designed to the specific strengths of the technology. So try to get the magic from the new input devices. And in terms of things that bother me, yes, typing is a big problem. And I'm working on fixing it. Yes.
I think we all can relate, and that's why we also need more designers and artists that actually questions the status quo and push. So yeah,
I just want to mention that on that tip, because I think it's so interesting, the typing thing. I've like created a really wacky prototype for typing with your tongue, because your tongue is like a thumb, right? It's like it's the most complex muscle in our body. It can do anything, and it's really underutilized. So it's interesting looking at what you can do. Like if you really think out of the box, like what could that really look like from an accessibility perspective? Because to me, like maybe a lot of people say like talking is going to be the, just voice like translation, but maybe it's not always appropriate to be talking out loud, right? And so there's interesting ideas of like different ways that, like, I think we get so hung up on the ways that things have been done that we don't even think about like really, really new ways that we could address this issue, like our tongues.
Yeah. And also, just talking about it, yeah, blending and integrating real-time and biometric data means an increasingly responsibility for designers that are now and creators when it comes to privacy and safety. How did it lead to you to deal more and more with the topic of dystopia and utopia, Sam?
Unmute. It's something that came up a lot, obviously being, in the early adopter space, a bunch of metaverse streamers nerding out on Discord for hours and hours and hours every day for 5 years. You hear kind of you think up all sorts of stories. But one thing that, like, on the dystopic side, something that I thought was really cool that we had played around with was visualizing trackers, like visualizing cookies. And this idea that you could start to give people a little bit more context to code that runs in the background by helping people visualize what these things mean and what they do, and having something that, like, maybe if you came to my WebXR clubhouse, I'd be like, Yinch, clear your cache before you come in here. I don't know what you're bringing into my place, right? Like, it's like, take your shoes off, right? And so there's some kind of cool stuff there that can be discussed from like visualizing dystopic things that are already happening. But I think there's a lot more interesting things that can happen on the utopic side with dreaming up inputs and outputs. And even something interesting, like the web was always meant to be read write, like input output, like the radio started off that way and became a one-way channel for the most part. And I think when you think about something like haptics, an environment feeding back to you right away, you're really starting to get this back and forth, which is super interesting. And something that I worked on for years that is a little bit maybe more utopic around the data side is I was a DJ and performer for a decade, and like had a very wild, like punk rock kind of persona, and tweeted and had this huge online presence, and all of my Facebook, all my Twitter, and I scraped all that and I made this corpus of text and put it into a crappy chat bot, into a bot of myself. Like my name is Blondtron, and she's supposed to be this entertainment robot. And so actually put an archive of kind of who I was in this time period into a bot, and had this really unique experience actually going into VR for the first time and chatting with myself and being a little bit like, normally, like, when you see something like your old photos from college or something, it might be a little cringe. And I think we have these square way of looking at ourselves that has really made us hyper. We're always in our analytical brain when we're looking at ourselves. And like, there's something that happens when you see a body, like these mirror neurons fire, all this compassion and all those things come in to flood your system. And a lot of it's not conscious. And there's something that happened to me in seeing my past, seeing past data represented to me in a body to me. I felt like I was seeing myself kind of like how my friends see me. And it was a little bit more like, so I think there's a lot to explore there in self-discovery that I kind of want to push people towards, where it's like the best chance of avoiding a dystopia is if we have a bunch of self-aware, integrated, happy, safe feeling people. And I think the way that we get there is by actually like creating better ways for us to self-reflect about how all the stuff we're putting online, and the fact that we can now gain access to our data. I think there's a really interesting opportunity. I put it out to the audience. What are the ways you could use WebXR to take all the data people now have access to through GDPR and CCPR and or CCPA, and actually give people ways to look at themselves that feels more true to how we show up? I know we're almost out of time. So
we are almost out of time, and that's why I wanted to wrap up. Before we wrap up, I know we have a bunch of questions for all of us, but before we say goodbye, what do you guys think? What is essential, and what do we have to work on for the next 5+ years? And how important is multisensory, or what does multisensory experience mean for you guys? Yinch, maybe?
Hi, I'm really looking forward to getting many more designers in the WebXR space. I think it's still a space that's very heavily dominated by developers, and we possibly need a new category of tools as we reach out and we expect more people to occupy this space. The question of typing is worth noting, because and one of the responsibilities as a VR developer, as we are designing for other spaces as well, that when you design for VR, you're replacing the reality around them. It's not like another mouse or a keyboard or a joystick or a gamepad. When you go into VR, you lose all these things. And I think people don't like to being away from your phones. And so when you're designing for VR, be aware that you're taking people away somewhere. And so design to knowing that they are a bit uncomfortable being there.
Yeah, I agree with you, Jinch. I think that design schools are going to have to implement this as part of the curriculum. There's going to have to be a little bit of investment in that area as well. And I feel that we could also do a better job as a community to, put our resources together to really give those creators the funds and the resources that they need. We can't keep depending on the big, players to give us grants and to, give us their charity to do our jobs as creators.
And Sam, you got the last word.
Well, I just think that the main thing is that we actually have an opportunity to get back in touch with how we think, which is in 3D. And you see kids that are maybe going to skip this whole 2D generation, which we've had for a few hundred years, but it's not natural to us. And so I think that we're going to see something really exciting, which is like the more context and young, like teaching that we can do with this 3D context, teaching people to think in 3D, teaching people to visualize data in 3D, the better chance we'll have for just like exponential generations that'll solve all of our issues, because thinking in 2D sucks.
Awesome. Yeah. Any final thoughts, Adrian?
Yeah, I would actually say I think we should inspire people to close more value loops. Like the talent is out there to basically build all these things that we want to build. Like for whatever reason, whether it's we want cool worlds or we have some ethical goals that we're trying to meet. I think the talent is out there. We just need to inspire people more. And to me, I think the most important thing is just compatibility, not only in technology, but just like thinking about compatibility in terms of people and incentives. And when somebody makes some really good art, how can we make sure that we pay them for it?
Awesome. Well, with that, I think we're out of time and we need to move on to the next session. But thank you so much, all the panelists here, talking about all these different aspects of multiple input types.